I've always been one of those people who couldn't settle for just an ordinary job. Growing up, I was surrounded by entrepreneurs, my parents included, who ran their own small businesses. My mom was a florist, and my dad was a handyman. They didn't make a lot of money, but they loved what they did. I admired them, but I never really thought it would be my path. My dream, instead, was to get a stable job with a paycheck that was guaranteed. I went to college, graduated with a degree in marketing, and started working for a big company right out of school. I got hired by a tech startup. They promised me the world, and for a while, it was great. My salary was decent, I had a little office, and I felt like I was making an impact. But something kept gnawing at me. The company was growing fast, but with that growth came a lot of red tape, politics, and stress. I could already see the burnout setting in, and I felt that at some point, I was just going to be another cog in the machine. I had big ideas, but I wasn't able to implement them. My creativity felt stifled. One day, it hit me. I was sitting in a meeting where I had just pitched an idea that I thought could revolutionize a key product, only for it to be shot down by someone who wasn't even directly involved in the project. It was a small thing, but in that moment, I realized I didn't want to be stuck in that cycle forever. I wanted more control. I wanted to create something of my own, something that wasn't going to be dictated by corporate rules or policies. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay in that job forever. So, I began researching the possibilities. I looked into different types of businesses, everything from opening a cafe to starting an online clothing store. I spent late nights on Reddit, reading stories of people who took the plunge and made it big, and others who failed miserably. I knew I was taking a risk, but it felt right. The first step was to decide what kind of business to start. After months of trying to figure it out, I finally settled on something that seemed to fit my skills and interests: an online marketing agency. I had experience in marketing and knew how to use social media and paid ads to generate sales. I figured I could help small businesses grow by providing affordable marketing services that would help them reach their target audience. I had zero experience running a business, but I was determined to learn. The first few months were brutal. I started by freelancing on the side while still working my full-time job. I didn't have a website, I didn't have clients, and I didn't even have a solid plan. I was just throwing things at the wall and hoping something would stick. I started reaching out to local businesses, offering my services for ridiculously low prices. I didn't know how to price myself, so I just guessed. My first client was a local coffee shop, and I barely charged them anything, just enough to cover the cost of ads. To my surprise, they actually saw a return on their investment. Over the next few months, I gained a few more clients, mostly through word of mouth. I was working around the clock, spending nights and weekends developing strategies, running ads, and doing everything I could to keep my clients happy. But it wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up. I'd get frustrated when I couldn't find new clients or when I made a mistake that cost me money. But every time I hit a roadblock, I would remind myself why I was doing it. I wanted to build something of my own. About 6 months in, I had enough clients to go full-time with my business. I gave my notice at the startup and took the plunge. At that point, I was still running everything out of my tiny apartment. It felt surreal, quitting my job and stepping into the unknown. But the excitement of building something from the ground up was unmatched. I had control. I was no longer reporting to anyone. I was the boss, and it felt incredible. However, as soon as I quit my job, the reality of running a business set in. There were so many things I hadn't thought about: taxes, business licenses, accounting, contracts with clients. I spent a lot of time learning about the legal side of things. There were months when I barely made any money. I had to get creative with how I kept things afloat. Some months I made less than I had as an employee, but I refused to give up. Every dollar I earned felt like a step forward, even if it was just a small one. Around a year into the business, things started picking up. My client base grew, and I started seeing consistent profits. I realized that while I had been focusing so much on serving others, I hadn't been thinking about my own personal growth. I wasn't learning as much as I should have about the business side of things, and it was holding me back. So, I began investing in my own education, taking courses on entrepreneurship, marketing, leadership, and finance. I joined online communities and attended networking events. Slowly but surely, my skills started improving, and with that, my business grew. One of the turning points for me was when I decided to scale up. I was spending so much time managing my clients' accounts that I didn't have the bandwidth to bring in new business. I needed help, but I was terrified of hiring employees. I had never managed anyone before, but I realized that in order to grow, I had to start building a team. So, I took the leap and hired my first part-time employee. Hiring was one of the best decisions I ever made. It allowed me to focus on high-level strategy and new business development, while my employee handled the day-to-day tasks. Over the next year, I continued hiring and building out a small but effective team. Things started moving fast. We began working with bigger clients, and I was able to increase my pricing. The business that had started as a side hustle was now a legitimate company. Fast forward 3 years, and I'm now running a full-fledged marketing agency with a team of 10 employees. We're working with clients across various industries, and I'm proud of the work we do. There are still tough days, and there are still plenty of challenges ahead, but I've never been happier. I went from barely making enough money to cover my bills to having a 6-figure business. And, more importantly, I get to do something I truly enjoy. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. It hasn't been easy, and there have been times when I thought about quitting, but I've learned so much. I've learned that success doesn't come overnight and that persistence and hard work pay off. I've learned to embrace failure and see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. And most of all, I've learned that the greatest reward is the freedom to live life on my own terms. If there's one piece of advice I would give to anyone thinking about starting a business, it's this: do it. It's going to be hard, and you're going to make mistakes, but if you're passionate and persistent, it's worth it. You don't have to have everything figured out from the start. Just take that first step, and everything else will fall into place. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I never thought I'd be here. In fact, I thought I was done. The past 2 years had been a blur of failures, frustrations, and a constant feeling of defeat. But somehow, here I am, running a business that's more successful than I ever dreamed. It's funny how life works like that. You think you're at rock bottom, and then something unexpected turns things around. Let me take you back to where it all started. I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of college with a degree in marketing. My friends were starting their corporate jobs, climbing the ladder, getting promotions. Everyone was so confident, so sure of their next step. I, on the other hand, felt like I was stumbling around in the dark. I didn't want the typical 9 to 5 grind. I had bigger dreams. I wanted to start something of my own, something that felt meaningful. So, I dove in headfirst. I didn't have much money saved up, just enough to keep me afloat for a few months, and I didn't know much about starting a business, but I knew one thing. I wanted to make an impact. I had a passion for sustainability and eco-friendly products, something I had been obsessed with for years. It seemed like a perfect match. I could create a business that helped people make better choices for the planet while making a living doing something I loved. I just had to figure out how. I started researching everything I could about eco-friendly products, the supply chain, and how businesses actually made money. At first, it was overwhelming. The more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. But I was determined. I went to thrift stores, scoured the internet, and read endless books on business strategies. After a few months of research, I decided to create a brand that sold reusable items, water bottles, tote bags, and straws made of sustainable materials. I launched the business with zero budget for marketing, relying entirely on word of mouth and a small following I'd built on Instagram by sharing eco-friendly tips. The first few months were slow. Really slow. I had a couple of sales here and there, but nothing substantial. It was discouraging, but I pushed through. I continued creating new designs, trying to optimize the website, and putting out content. Then, after about 6 months, something unexpected happened. I got a message from an influencer with a pretty large following in the eco-friendly space. She had seen my products on Instagram and wanted to feature them in one of her posts. I was ecstatic, but at the same time, I was terrified. I couldn't afford to send her a free product, let alone pay for a paid promotion. I had nothing but a small stash of products and a tiny bank account that was barely hanging on. But this was my shot. So, I did what I had to do. I sent her a message explaining my situation, offering to send her the products in exchange for a post. I told her that I was just starting out and that I really believed in the products. To my surprise, she replied, and not only did she agree to try out my products, but she also offered to create the content for free. That was the moment everything changed. Her post went viral. People from all over started messaging me, asking where they could buy my products. Sales skyrocketed, and for the first time since starting this business, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was on the right track. But it didn't last long. The next few months were a whirlwind of success and stress. Orders came in faster than I could keep up with. I was working 18-hour days, barely sleeping, scrambling to pack orders and find suppliers. I didn't know it then, but I was heading straight for burnout. I had no systems in place, no help, and I was struggling to balance the demand with my limited resources. Then, a few months after the viral post, disaster struck. My main supplier, the one that provided the materials for the reusable products, went out of business. Just like that, my inventory was wiped out. I had customers waiting for orders, but no products to send them. I felt like I was back at square one. I couldn't afford to find a new supplier, and I had no idea what to do. I was devastated. My sales plummeted, and customer trust started to dwindle. I felt like I had worked so hard for something only to watch it fall apart. For the first time, I seriously considered quitting. I thought maybe this wasn't meant to be. I was too small, too underfunded, and too inexperienced. But quitting wasn't an option. I realized I had to make a decision. I either doubled down on this business and found a way to get past this obstacle, or I walked away. So, I borrowed money from family and friends, which was awkward, to say the least, and started reaching out to new suppliers. This time, I wasn't going to just trust anyone. I needed to find partners who were reliable, ethical, and capable of delivering. It took months, but eventually, I found a new supplier that worked. I redesigned my website, rebranded a bit, and launched a marketing campaign to get back on the map. Slowly but surely, sales started to grow again. I wasn't where I had been before, but I was back on my feet, and that felt like an accomplishment in itself. The business started growing again, but this time, I was smarter about it. I invested in a better system to track inventory, hired part-time help to manage orders, and focused more on building relationships with my customers. I made it a point to engage with them on social media, respond to emails quickly, and offer promotions. I wanted to create a community around my brand, something that felt real and not just transactional. And it paid off. Over the next 2 years, the business grew steadily. I eventually expanded my product range, added new features to the website, and started collaborating with other eco-friendly brands. We even got featured in a few major publications, which helped push us to new heights. Now, here I am. My business is doing well. I've got a team of incredible people working with me, and we're making a difference in the world. It hasn't been easy, far from it, but it's been worth every single challenge. I'm not some overnight success story. It's been a journey full of setbacks, failures, and lessons learned the hard way. If I could go back and give my younger self one piece of advice, it would be this: don't give up. Even when it feels impossible, even when it seems like everything is falling apart, keep going. The most important part of being an entrepreneur isn't the ideas or the initial excitement. It's the perseverance to push through the tough times and keep building, no matter how hard it gets. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that the journey so far has been worth every ounce of sweat and tears. So, to anyone out there who's struggling, feeling like they're on the verge of quitting, don't. Keep going. You never know when the breakthrough will come. My name is Ryan, and my story is a testament to what happens when you don't give up, even when everything seems like it's falling apart. This is the tale of how I went from having absolutely nothing to building a business worth millions. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments when I thought about quitting. But if you keep pushing, sometimes things just work out. I grew up in a small town. My family wasn't poor, but we definitely weren't wealthy either. My parents worked hard, and we always had what we needed, but there were no luxuries. I spent most of my childhood working odd jobs, mowing lawns, delivering newspapers, helping neighbors with grocery shopping. My parents taught me the value of hard work, and from a young age, I knew I wanted to be more than just another face in the crowd. When I graduated from high school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was good with computers, so I decided to pursue a degree in computer science. College was a turning point for me, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't the classes that changed me. It was the late nights I spent brainstorming business ideas and looking for ways to make money online. It started small. I built websites for local businesses, designed logos, and even dabbled in selling things on eBay. The problem was, I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't business savvy. I didn't know how to scale or market myself. After graduation, I took a job at a tech company. It paid well, and I had benefits, but I quickly realized that the corporate world wasn't for me. I hated the 9-to-5 grind. I hated being told when to show up and when to leave. I hated the office politics. More than anything, I hated the idea that I was building someone else's dream instead of my own. I quit my job after just a year. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to try. So, I cashed in my savings, moved into a small apartment, and decided to focus full-time on building my own business. I was broke, terrified, and uncertain, but I had something that no one could take away, a deep hunger to make it. I started by taking on small freelance projects, just like I had done in college. But now, I was doing it full-time, trying to make ends meet while learning everything I could about marketing, sales, and entrepreneurship. The first year was a disaster. I barely made enough to cover my rent. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford furniture. There were days when I would wake up and wonder if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The pressure was immense, but I didn't give up. I spent hours learning about digital marketing, SEO, and social media. I would cold call businesses, send out dozens of emails, and try to network with anyone I could. Slowly, I started to gain traction. The breakthrough came when I landed my first major client. They were a local business with a strong online presence but a terrible website. I redesigned it, optimized their SEO, and helped them create an effective social media campaign. Within 3 months, their traffic had increased by 50%, and their sales were up 30%. They were thrilled, and so was I. The satisfaction of knowing that my work had helped them grow was worth more than any paycheck. This project led to more referrals, and before I knew it, I had a steady stream of clients. But it didn't end there. I realized that in order to scale, I couldn't just keep doing everything myself. I had to build a team. Hiring the right people was one of the hardest and most important decisions I've ever made. The first few hires were terrifying. I remember sitting down with one of the first employees I hired, a talented designer named Sarah. I was still trying to figure things out myself, but I knew I needed help. I told her that I didn't have much to offer in terms of salary, but if she worked with me, we could grow together. She believed in me, and she joined the team. With Sarah on board, we started to expand our services. We hired more designers, marketers, and even a developer. I knew that in order to really grow, we had to offer more than just basic website design. We needed to provide full-service digital marketing solutions. This meant investing in tools, training, and processes that would allow us to deliver even better results for our clients. I started learning about paid ads, email marketing, and lead generation. As the business grew, so did the challenges. Cash flow became an issue, and I had to juggle paying employees, covering overhead, and still investing in new projects. I remember a particularly tough time when we were in between projects, and I didn't have enough money to pay the team. I had to call everyone into a meeting and explain the situation. It was humiliating, but I was honest with them. I promised that if they stuck with me, we'd come out the other side stronger. They did. I managed to secure a few more clients, and slowly, the financial stress eased. A few years in, we hit our first big milestone. Our revenue hit 6 figures. It felt surreal. I couldn't believe we had gone from barely scraping by to having a full-fledged business with employees and a real office space. We were no longer just a small freelance operation. We were a legitimate agency. And then, the next challenge came, scaling to the next level. This was the hardest part. I had built something that was successful, but it was still fragile. We weren't making the kind of money I wanted, and I knew we needed to innovate. This is when I decided to pivot. We stopped offering just basic services and instead focused on building custom software solutions for businesses. It was a risk, but I believed that the future was in technology, and custom solutions were the key to long-term growth. We spent months developing our first major software product, a customer relationship management (CRM) tool tailored to small businesses. It wasn't perfect, but it filled a gap in the market, and we saw early signs of success. Clients loved the product, and soon, we had a subscription-based service. It became our primary source of income, and the growth we experienced was nothing short of exponential. Today, my company is worth millions. We have hundreds of employees, multiple products, and a portfolio of successful projects. But I'll never forget those early days when it seemed like everything was falling apart. I've made plenty of mistakes, but each one taught me something valuable. I've learned that success isn't about having the right answers right away. It's about being willing to put in the work, take risks, and adapt when things don't go as planned. More than anything, it's about never giving up. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success wasn't a magical formula or secret knowledge. It was simply persistence. I kept showing up, even when it felt impossible. If you're reading this and wondering if you should take that leap, my advice is simple: do it. You might fail, but you'll learn. And every failure brings you closer to success. The road is never easy, but it's always worth it. I'll start by saying this. If you're an entrepreneur or thinking about starting your own business, it's not all glitz, glamour, and easy paychecks. In fact, if you're not mentally prepared for the brutal grind, you're in for a world of hurt. This is my story of how I built my business from a simple idea to a multi-million-dollar company and almost lost it all along the way. But at the end of the day, the lessons I learned were worth every sleepless night and heart-pounding moment of doubt. It all started back in 2015. I was 27 years old, working a dead-end job as a marketing coordinator at a small agency. The hours were long, the pay wasn't great, and I felt like I was stuck in a never-ending loop of mediocrity. I wasn't unhappy. Well, not totally unhappy, but I knew I was capable of doing more. The idea of being my own boss had always nagged at me, but I had no clue what that would look like. Then one day, I was browsing the internet, as I often did when I should have been working, and came across an article about e-commerce. I was intrigued. People were building businesses on Shopify, Amazon, and other platforms from their apartments, garages, and even their kitchens. This was it. I could do this. I'd sell something online. But what? After some research, I settled on a product that I thought could be big: custom phone accessories. At the time, phone cases and pop sockets were all the rage. I wasn't an expert in product design, but I figured I could find someone who was. I spent weeks reaching out to manufacturers, trying to figure out how to make this whole thing work. Every step felt like an obstacle. From setting up the website to choosing the right product line, nothing was easy. But I was committed. By the time I finally launched my first store in late 2015, I was exhausted. I poured all of my savings into this venture, about $5,000, hoping it would pay off. I remember the day I launched, nervously watching the website for any sign of a sale. The first few days were dead. No one was buying anything. That was when the panic started to set in. I kept refreshing my email, hoping for an order notification. Days went by, and it felt like all my efforts were in vain. But then, just as I was about to give up, the first order came through. It was small, just one phone case. But it was something. It was a sign that this could work. I remember celebrating that night with a cheap bottle of wine, my wife looking at me like I was insane for celebrating such a small victory. But for me, that order meant everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's it. A small order? Why would you even bother? Well, here's the thing. That first sale validated my idea. It proved to me that people were willing to pay for something I'd created. That $10 order wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it gave me the momentum to keep going. The next few months were tough. I continued to get a few sales here and there, but not enough to sustain the business. I realized that I needed to scale faster if I wanted this to work. That's when I started running Facebook ads. I had no clue what I was doing, but I poured more money into advertising, hoping for a breakthrough. The ads didn't perform well at first. In fact, I was losing money. But then something clicked. When a campaign took off. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. I started getting hundreds of visitors to my site every day, and the sales started rolling in. By the end of 2016, I had made enough money to quit my job and go full-time into the business. My dream was finally becoming a reality. But the journey wasn't without its hurdles. There were countless late nights spent packing orders, dealing with customer complaints, and trying to stay ahead of competitors. There were months when I thought the business was going to fail, and I was ready to throw in the towel. But I stuck with it, and things started to improve. In 2017, I brought on my first employee, a customer service rep who helped me deal with the growing number of inquiries and complaints. It was a small step, but it freed up my time to focus on scaling the business even more. We expanded our product range, improved our marketing strategies, and reinvested every dollar we made into the business. Fast forward to 2018, and the business was booming. We were generating millions of dollars in revenue each year, and I had built a team of dedicated people who shared my vision. Things were looking up. I thought I had everything figured out. But then came the crash. In 2019, we hit a wall. Hard. We had expanded too quickly. The market had become saturated with competitors, and we couldn't keep up with the demand. Our products were starting to get poor reviews, and our suppliers were struggling to meet our orders. Sales started to decline, and by the end of 2019, we were in the red. I was losing money fast. That was the lowest point in my entrepreneurial journey. I had put everything into this business, my time, my money, my reputation. I couldn't afford to lose it all. But instead of giving up, I decided to pivot. I realized that the phone accessory market was too competitive, and it wasn't sustainable long-term. I decided to switch gears and focus on a new niche, high-end home decor. This decision wasn't easy. It meant walking away from everything I had built, everything that had gotten me to this point. But after a lot of research, planning, and tweaking, we launched our new product line in 2020. It was a risk, but it paid off. Slowly but surely, the business started to recover. We found our footing in the home decor market, and our new products began to take off. By 2021, we were back to being profitable, and I finally felt like I was on top of the world again. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the lessons I had learned along the way. Looking back, the biggest lesson I learned was that failure is part of the process. Every successful entrepreneur goes through periods of doubt, struggles, and setbacks. But the key is to adapt, to learn from your mistakes and keep moving forward. Success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about pushing through it. Today, my company is doing better than I ever imagined. We've expanded into new markets, and we've built a loyal customer base. But I'll never forget those early days, those moments of doubt when I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. If you're an entrepreneur or thinking about starting a business, my advice is this: embrace the grind. It's going to be tough, and there will be moments when you'll want to quit. But if you stay focused, keep learning, and never give up, you'll find success on the other side. And most importantly, don't forget to celebrate the small victories, because those small wins are what will carry you through when things get hard. A few years ago, I was just another average guy working a 9-to-5 job. I never really had any big dreams of starting my own business, but I had a nagging feeling that there had to be more to life than sitting behind a desk every day. Little did I know, my life would take a sharp turn one day because of one simple observation. I worked in a small office doing digital marketing for a local company. The pay was decent, but it was the typical corporate grind. I spent my days in meetings, writing reports, and struggling to keep up with the constant pressure. I was lucky enough to have some decent coworkers who made the days bearable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was wasting my potential. It wasn't a bad job by any means, but I knew I could do more, be more. However, I didn't know exactly what that more was. It all started one day while I was browsing through Instagram during my lunch break. I had a habit of following a bunch of fitness influencers and motivational accounts because it kept me inspired and feeling like I could do something big. One particular post caught my attention. It was a guy, about my age, holding a shiny new product and talking about how he'd just launched his first business. The caption was filled with terms like hustle and grind and freedom, and while it was nothing revolutionary, it struck a chord with me. This guy wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't even talking about making millions, but he was just like me, and yet, he had created something of his own. A product, a business, something real. The curiosity in me sparked. I clicked on his page, saw his journey unfold in real time through stories and posts, and I realized something. If he could do it, why couldn't I? Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the idea of entrepreneurship. I didn't have a product, I didn't have a business idea, but I had an unshakable desire to get out of my cubicle. I started researching business ideas at night, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and taking notes on anything that seemed remotely interesting. I remember one night staying up till 2 a.m., watching a video about dropshipping, and feeling my mind racing. It sounded simple enough: sell products online without having to hold inventory. It felt like the perfect entry-level business. It was low cost, required little technical know-how, and, according to many gurus, it had the potential to bring in passive income. So, I took the plunge. I knew I needed to get started, but I was terrified of failing. I didn't have the luxury of quitting my job yet, so I began working on my business at night and on weekends. I'd spend my lunch breaks researching suppliers, writing product descriptions, and designing a website on Shopify. To be honest, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was determined to figure it out. After about a month, I launched my online store. I sold phone accessories, specifically high-quality, stylish cases. The market was crowded, but I figured I could carve out a niche by offering unique designs and premium materials. I spent countless hours tweaking my store, writing Facebook ads, and setting up email campaigns. I even started an Instagram page to build a following. I was hustling every day after work, completely exhausted but also feeling a sense of accomplishment. I had my product up, my marketing running, and the store was live. But the sales? Well, they were non-existent. I'm not exaggerating when I say I had zero sales for the first month. Zero. Zilch. Nothing. I had spent all this time and money setting everything up, and yet, it felt like I was screaming into the void. The worst part was that I didn't even know what went wrong. My ads were running, my website was decent, and I thought I had done enough research to know what people wanted. But no one was buying. I couldn't afford to quit, though. I had already invested a few $100s into the business, and I wasn't ready to give up on something I had worked so hard for. So, I kept experimenting. I learned more about digital marketing, A/B testing, SEO, and customer behavior. Slowly but surely, I began to make small improvements. I started testing new ad copy, adjusting my targeting, and tweaking my product offerings. Every small win felt like a huge victory. By the end of the second month, I made my first sale. It wasn't much, just a $15 phone case, but it was a start. That sale felt like I had cracked the code. Even though the profits were negligible, I had made a real sale. Someone, somewhere, trusted my brand enough to spend their hard-earned money. That was a turning point. I didn't let the small amount of revenue discourage me. I used it as fuel to keep going. Over the next 6 months, things started to improve. I learned how to refine my Facebook and Instagram ads. I developed a better understanding of what my audience liked, and I began offering promotions and discounts to drive traffic. The sales grew incrementally. By the end of the year, I was making enough to cover my costs and a bit of profit. But I wasn't content with just covering costs. I wanted more. That's when I realized I had to scale. I couldn't do it alone anymore. I hired a freelancer to help with product photography and began outsourcing some of the design work. I also brought on a friend who had experience in customer service to help manage inquiries and returns. With a small team in place, I was able to focus on marketing and growth, and that's when things really took off. A year and a half into my business journey, I had replaced my corporate salary with the income from my store. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of sleepless nights, setbacks, and failures, but it felt like the dream was coming true. I'd gone from sitting in an office cubicle, staring at a computer screen, to running my own business full-time. The freedom was incredible. Today, I'm proud to say that my business has expanded into a full-fledged brand. We don't just sell phone accessories anymore. We've broadened our product line to include custom-designed clothing and lifestyle products. We've built a loyal customer base, and I've learned so much along the way. I still can't believe that the guy who was stuck in a corporate job just a few years ago is now running his own successful business. Was it easy? No. Was it worth it? Absolutely. I don't think I'll ever stop learning or growing as an entrepreneur. If anything, I've learned that the journey is just as important as the destination. For anyone out there thinking of starting their own business, don't wait. You don't need to have it all figured out from the beginning. The key is to start, learn as you go, and stay consistent. The road will be bumpy, and there will be moments where you feel like giving up, but those are the moments that make success feel even sweeter. If you're passionate enough, if you're willing to put in the work, and if you keep moving forward, you'll get there. I'm living proof that a regular guy, with no special background or huge resources, can build something meaningful. It won't be easy, but it will definitely be worth it. I still remember the moment it all started. It was the fall of 2017, and I was sitting at my desk in a tiny, cramped apartment in Brooklyn, New York. The day was like any other, a dull mix of emails, deadlines, and the occasional bit of freelance work I did to get by. I had a steady job as a digital marketing specialist, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was this deep, gnawing feeling inside me that I had a bigger purpose, but I just didn't know what it was. I had always dreamed of being an entrepreneur. Ever since I was a kid, I had this fascination with people who built things from the ground up. My heroes were always the ones who went against the grain, who didn't play by the rules, and who were willing to risk everything for a dream. But, like so many people, I got caught up in the safe path. I took a job right after college, settled into a routine, and let go of the idea of starting something on my own. At least, that's what I told myself. Deep down, I knew I was holding back. That afternoon, I stumbled upon a podcast where a guy was talking about the importance of failing fast and learning from mistakes. It hit me like a ton of bricks. What if the reason I wasn't moving forward was because I was too afraid of failing? What if I was just too comfortable in my job and too scared to take a risk? The idea rattled around in my head for weeks. I couldn't ignore it. One evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. I walked down the streets of Brooklyn, the cold air biting my face, as I thought about all the things I wanted to do but hadn't done. The thought of quitting my job and diving into the unknown terrified me, but I realized that it was now or never. I didn't want to look back in 20 years and regret never trying. I started doing some research, and after countless hours of reading and watching videos, I decided to start an online store. But not just any store. I wanted to sell something that would stand out in a crowded marketplace. After some brainstorming, I landed on a niche I was passionate about: eco-friendly products. At the time, sustainability was a buzzword, but I saw a gap in the market. People were starting to care more about the environment, but there weren't many companies that offered high-quality, eco-friendly products at an affordable price. So, I pulled the trigger. I spent the next few weeks working on my business plan, designing a website, and sourcing products from suppliers. I even started a blog to build up some SEO before the launch. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I had to make every dollar count. I used my savings to get started and didn't have the luxury of hiring a team, so I did everything myself. I designed the website, took product photos, wrote content, and ran ads, all while working full-time at my day job. I would stay up late, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, just to get things done. The first few months were tough. I didn't have any sales, and I began to question whether this was a mistake. I had put everything into this, and it felt like I was just throwing money down the drain. There were days when I would look at my sales dashboard and see nothing but zeros. But I kept pushing forward. I reached out to influencers, posted on social media, and tried every marketing tactic I could find. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. The first sale came in on a random Tuesday evening, and I remember the feeling of pure exhilaration. Someone had actually bought something from my store. It wasn't a lot of money, but it felt like a huge validation. Over the next few months, the orders started to increase. I learned the ins and outs of online marketing, Facebook ads, email campaigns, and customer service. Every day was a new challenge, but I loved the hustle. I could feel my confidence growing. I was no longer just someone working a 9-to-5 job. I was building something on my own. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of sleepless nights and moments when I thought I was in way over my head, but the excitement of building something from scratch kept me going. Then, one day, disaster struck. My supplier informed me that they had run out of stock for one of my best-selling products. It was a blow to my business, and I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. I had invested a lot of time and money into that product, and now I had nothing to offer my customers. I had to act fast. I spent hours contacting other suppliers, trying to find a replacement. It took weeks to find a new source, and during that time, sales slowed down significantly. I lost customers and faced negative reviews, but I refused to let it derail me. I learned an important lesson. Adaptability is key in business. If something goes wrong, you can't just sit back and let it take you down. You have to pivot and keep moving forward. By mid-2018, I had made enough sales to quit my day job. I was still running the business solo, but I had a steady income, and I was finally able to focus all my energy on my store. That was a huge moment for me. I had taken the leap, and it felt incredible to finally be my own boss. But my journey didn't stop there. As the business grew, I had to scale up. I hired my first employee, a customer service rep, and slowly started outsourcing tasks that I couldn't keep up with. We expanded our product line, improved our website, and invested more into marketing. We even started a subscription box service for eco-friendly products, which was a huge hit with customers. Things were looking up. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and like many other businesses, we faced challenges. People stopped shopping for non-essential items, and our sales plummeted. I was worried. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it felt like everything was falling apart. But once again, I knew I had to adapt. I shifted our focus to essential items like hand sanitizers, face masks, and disinfectants, all while still maintaining our core value of sustainability. It wasn't easy, but it worked. We were able to survive the pandemic and come out stronger on the other side. Fast forward to 2025, and my business is thriving. We've expanded internationally, built a loyal customer base, and even have a few employees working in different departments. We've been featured in some major publications, and I've spoken at a few conferences about entrepreneurship. But more than anything, I'm proud of the fact that I've created a company that stands for something sustainability, and has made a real impact on people's lives. It hasn't been a smooth ride, and there have been plenty of mistakes along the way, but every challenge has been a learning experience. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the work or the late nights or the failures. It was overcoming my own fear of failure. It was getting past the what-ifs and just taking the leap. If you're reading this and you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Just do it. The road won't be easy, but it will be worth it. And if I can do it, so can you. End of story. I never expected to be a successful entrepreneur. In fact, I never thought I'd even be an entrepreneur at all. I was the kind of person who went through school, got a degree, and settled into a safe job. I spent the better part of my 20s in an office cubicle, staring at spreadsheets and wondering if this was really all life had to offer. But everything changed when I was 28, and I'll never forget the day it happened. It wasn't some grand moment of inspiration or some light bulb flashing above my head. It was something far simpler and more subtle, a conversation with a colleague that made me realize I was doing everything wrong. It all started one morning when I was chatting with Mike, a guy I worked with in the marketing department. Mike was the kind of person who always had something new going on. He was always tinkering with side projects, running a small blog, or dabbling in some e-commerce venture. He had that vibe of someone who wasn't just satisfied with his day job but was constantly seeking more. We were talking about a new marketing campaign we were launching. But then, out of nowhere, he asked, "So, what's your side hustle?" It caught me off guard. I hadn't even thought of that term, side hustle, as anything more than a buzzword. I had my job, and that was it. I wasn't some hustler. I didn't think I had the time or the resources to start something else. But Mike kept pushing. Everyone has something. Whether it's a blog, YouTube, or even flipping products on eBay. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be something that gets you excited. His words lingered in my mind for weeks. What if he was right? What if I was just going through the motions of life, not really living? I spent nights lying awake, wondering if I was wasting my time. I started to realize that I had a deep frustration with my job, not because of the work itself, but because I wasn't creating anything of my own. I wasn't taking risks. I wasn't being bold. I knew that the thought of starting something would be terrifying. I didn't have any special skills, and I had zero experience in running a business. But then, that's when the real shift happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many people felt just like me, trapped in their jobs, too afraid to take the leap. And in that realization, I saw an opportunity. The idea came to me one night while I was watching a documentary about sustainable living. One of the interviewees mentioned how much money she saved by making her own cleaning products instead of buying commercial brands. That got me thinking. Why did we buy so many chemicals and harsh products when there were so many simple, natural alternatives out there? The idea started small. Maybe I could sell natural cleaning supplies. But it wasn't enough. The more I thought about it, the more the idea grew. I wasn't just going to sell products. I was going to build a movement. A brand that didn't just sell something but taught people how to live healthier, more sustainable lives. A company that focused on environmentally friendly, non-toxic cleaning products, but also gave customers the tools and knowledge to make the switch themselves. I had zero experience in the industry. I had no idea where to start, and I was still working my 9 to 5. But the idea wouldn't leave me. I started researching in every free moment I had, reading about the supply chain, branding, marketing, and sustainability. I joined online communities of like-minded people who shared my passion for green living, and I learned from their experiences. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a philosophy. I wanted my company to be about more than just profit. I wanted it to stand for something bigger. I didn't want people to just buy my products. I wanted to inspire them to live better, healthier lives. I spent the next several months working on the product line, getting samples from manufacturers, testing different formulas, and tweaking the designs. It was exhausting. There were nights when I barely slept, days when I wanted to throw in the towel because nothing was working. But I kept going, fueled by the vision of what my business could become. One of the hardest parts wasn't the product development, it was the branding. I had no background in design, and making my brand stand out in a crowded market felt overwhelming. But I realized something crucial. My story was my brand. People weren't just buying cleaning products. They were buying into a vision of a cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable life. And that vision had to come through in everything I did. By the time I was ready to launch, I had already established an online presence. I built a website, created social media profiles, and started sharing my journey. I didn't just want to sell products. I wanted to build a community of people who believed in the same values I did. I shared everything, my struggles, my failures, and my small victories. When the day came to launch my website, I was a nervous wreck. I spent weeks preparing for it, and the anticipation was eating me alive. But when I clicked the publish button, something unexpected happened. Nothing. I had no sales. Zero. Zilch. It was a punch to the gut. I spent the entire night staring at the screen, wondering if I had made a huge mistake. I questioned everything. Maybe my idea was terrible, or maybe no one cared about sustainability. But after the self-doubt started to fade, I realized that this was just part of the journey. Building a business doesn't happen overnight, and no one was going to know about my products unless I put in the work. So I kept pushing. I reached out to influencers in the sustainability space, collaborated with bloggers, and started running small ad campaigns. I engaged with my followers, answering questions and sharing insights into my process. Slowly but surely, things began to pick up. Sales started trickling in. Customers began leaving reviews, and word of mouth spread. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in a sea of to-do lists and obstacles. But eventually, I started to see the fruits of my labor. My business wasn't just about making money, it was about making a difference. It was about showing people that they didn't have to sacrifice their health or the environment for convenience. Fast forward to today, and I'm not only running a thriving business, but I'm also living a life I never thought possible. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't just about the money. It's about the growth, the challenges, and the people you meet along the way. It's about following your passion and making an impact, no matter how small it may seem at first. I've learned to embrace failure, because every failure is a lesson. I've learned that success doesn't come easily, but with persistence, it's possible. And most importantly, I've learned that the only real failure is giving up. If you're thinking about starting your own business, don't wait for the perfect moment. It'll never come. Start now, even if it's small, even if it's messy. Take that first step, and you'll be amazed at where it takes you. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because they're part of the journey. And always remember, no dream is too big, and no idea is too small to make a difference. It was the summer of 2014 when I decided to quit my stable job and take a chance on something that I had always dreamed of, starting my own business. I was 28, had just gotten my MBA, and had a decent job at a marketing firm. By all accounts, everything was going well, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something else. I had this constant itch to create something from scratch, something that could make a real impact. Little did I know, that decision would change the course of my life in ways I could never have imagined. At the time, I was obsessed with fitness. I spent my free time at the gym, trying out new workout routines, and reading up on nutrition and health. It was a passion that took up much of my mind, and I began to see the gaps in the fitness industry. There were thousands of fitness programs out there, but most of them were either generic, too difficult to follow, or just plain ineffective. I realized there was a huge opportunity to create something personalized, something that didn't just give you a set of exercises, but one that took into account your body type, goals, and lifestyle. With no prior experience in product development or app creation, I took a leap of faith. I spent the next 6 months building a business plan and learning everything I could about app development. I spent hours every night watching YouTube tutorials, reading blogs, and reaching out to people who had experience in the field. I remember feeling so overwhelmed, thinking, what have I gotten myself into? But I couldn't stop. I was determined to make it work. In early 2015, I left my job. I didn't have much saved up. I had a few $1,000s in the bank, but I knew that if I wanted this to succeed, I needed to be all in. I found a co-founder, a brilliant software developer who was just as passionate about fitness as I was. Together, we started sketching out the app. We wanted to create a platform that combined customized workout plans, nutrition advice, and progress tracking in a way that was simple, user-friendly, and effective. The first few months were rough. We hit roadblock after roadblock. Finding the right developers was a challenge. There were times when the code wasn't working or the design wasn't coming out as we had hoped. We had to go through dozens of iterations, testing, and tweaking before we had something that was remotely usable. But we didn't give up. We also needed funding. Neither of us had the kind of capital to fully fund the project ourselves, so we turned to crowdfunding. I remember launching the campaign, feeling both excited and terrified. It was make or break. Would people believe in our idea? Would they be willing to support us financially? The first 24 hours of the campaign were nerve-wracking. The response was slow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe we had underestimated the challenge. But then something amazing happened. Word started to spread. People started sharing our campaign, and the pledges began to trickle in. By the end of the first week, we had raised more than we had hoped. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep us going for a few more months. With the funds in place, we hired a small team to help us with the development. The real breakthrough came when we partnered with a few influencers in the fitness community. We asked them to try out our app, and in exchange, they would provide feedback and help us spread the word. To our surprise, they loved it. Their audiences began downloading the app, and soon we had our first batch of users. Despite the early successes, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still plenty of hurdles to overcome. One of the biggest issues we faced was scaling. As our user base grew, we started experiencing bugs and glitches. Our servers couldn't handle the influx of traffic, and the app would often crash. It was frustrating. People were getting upset, and we were doing everything we could to fix the issues as quickly as possible. But then, something clicked. After a particularly tough week of troubleshooting, I woke up one morning with a solution. We could migrate the app to a more powerful server architecture that could scale with demand. It wasn't a cheap solution, but it would solve the problem long-term. With our limited funds, I decided to go for it. We invested in the new infrastructure, and, miraculously, the app became more stable. By the end of 2015, we had over 10,000 users. It was small compared to some of the big players in the fitness app space, but it was a huge milestone for us. We were still far from turning a profit, but the feedback from users kept us motivated. People were seeing real results. They were getting stronger, losing weight, and achieving their fitness goals. That's when I realized that we weren't just building an app, we were building a community. Fast forward to 2017, and our business had exploded. We had tens of thousands of users and had started generating revenue through subscriptions and partnerships. We also expanded into fitness equipment, selling everything from dumbbells to resistance bands. It was a natural extension of our brand, and it helped us diversify our income streams. But the growth didn't come without its challenges. As the company grew, so did the pressure. Managing a team, handling customer support, and keeping up with the competition were all constant stressors. I found myself working 12-hour days, barely sleeping, and losing touch with friends and family. My mental and physical health began to decline. I had built something amazing, but I had lost sight of why I started it in the first place. In early 2018, I took a step back. I realized I had to take care of myself in order to take care of the business. I hired a COO to help manage the day-to-day operations, which allowed me to focus on strategy and growth. I also began to prioritize self-care, hitting the gym, eating right, and getting more sleep. It was a tough adjustment, but it was necessary. By 2020, we had become one of the top fitness apps in the world. We had expanded globally, and our user base was in the millions. Our app was featured in major publications, and we had partnerships with big brands. But for me, the true success wasn't the revenue or the accolades. It was the impact we had made. We had changed people's lives. We had helped them become healthier, stronger, and more confident. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. I've learned more than I ever could have imagined about business, tech, and myself. But more than anything, I've learned that success isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. It's about the people you meet, the lessons you learn, and the resilience you develop along the way. Now, in 2025, we're a thriving business with a global team. We're constantly evolving, constantly improving, and constantly trying to provide more value to our users. And even though we've achieved so much, I still feel that same drive, that same hunger to push further, to innovate, and to make a difference. I guess that's what being an entrepreneur is all about, constantly evolving, never settling, and always striving to be better. It's been an incredible journey, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I started my journey as an entrepreneur when I was just a kid. I've always had this obsessive drive to build things, but it wasn't until I was 21 that I decided to seriously pursue it. I didn't come from a family of business owners. My parents were teachers, and we lived in a small suburban town. Money was always tight, but they were happy with their lives, and they made it clear that hard work and education were the keys to success. At first, I followed the traditional path. I graduated from college with a degree in finance, got a good job at a decent firm, and moved into a small apartment in the city. It seemed like the logical step, and I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. But the deeper I got into my job, the more I realized something was missing. I hated the cubicle life. I hated how predictable everything was. Most of all, I hated how unfulfilled I felt. During one particularly long workday, I decided to take a break and went for a walk around the city. I saw a couple of street vendors selling handmade goods, and something clicked in me. I thought, these people are doing it. They're creating something with their hands, and they're making it work on their own terms. Why can't I do that? I had always been the type to tinker with things. I built computers when I was younger, helped friends with their tech issues, and was always messing around with gadgets. The idea of turning that passion into a business didn't seem so far-fetched. I'd seen a few tech startups in the city, and I thought, if they can do it, so can I. But like any good entrepreneur, I didn't just dive in without a plan. I spent the next few months researching. I stayed up late reading books about startups, marketing, product design, and business development. I looked for patterns in what worked and what didn't. The more I learned, the more I realized that the path to success wasn't as glamorous as it seemed from the outside. It was gritty, stressful, and full of rejection. But that didn't scare me. It motivated me. I took a leap of faith and quit my job. I remember walking out of the office for the last time, feeling a mix of excitement and terror. I had no idea where I was headed, but I was determined to make it work. My first business idea came out of the blue. One night, I was having dinner with a few friends, and we started talking about how hard it was to find quality tech accessories that were both affordable and stylish. I realized that there was a gap in the market. Most of the products available were either overpriced or poorly designed. That was when I decided to launch my first venture, a line of affordable, high-quality, and stylish tech accessories. I didn't have a big budget, and I definitely didn't have a network in the industry, but I had drive. I spent every waking moment learning how to design, source products, and build a website. I remember spending weeks on end working on branding, trying to come up with the perfect name for the company. I wanted it to be memorable but also representative of my vision. Finally, after endless brainstorming sessions, I settled on Techniest. I found a manufacturer overseas who could produce the accessories at a decent price, and I set up a small online store. My initial investment was small, just a few $1,000s for the first batch of products and marketing, but I was betting everything I had on this idea. The first few months were rough. Sales were slow, and I had zero traction. I remember feeling like I was throwing money down the drain. I had spent hours optimizing my website and social media, but still, nothing seemed to work. At one point, I seriously considered giving up and going back to the corporate world. But then something changed. I realized I had been focusing too much on the product and not enough on the marketing. So, I completely shifted my strategy. I started reaching out to influencers in the tech space, sending them free products in exchange for honest reviews. Slowly but surely, the word began to spread. The first influencer to review my product was a small YouTuber with about 10,000 subscribers. Her video got around 2,000 views, but it was enough to generate a few sales. Those sales were like fuel to my fire. From there, I invested more in advertising. I learned how to use Facebook and Instagram ads, and I started experimenting with Google AdWords. I also joined tech forums and engaged with potential customers directly, building a community around my brand. Within 6 months, Techniest went from being a small side project to a full-time business. I couldn't believe it when I saw the numbers. Sales were increasing, and I was finally making a profit. But even then, the challenges didn't stop. Supply chain issues started to pop up, and the manufacturer I had been working with began to delay shipments. At one point, I had a backlog of orders, and I couldn't fulfill them fast enough. It was the first real crisis I faced, and it felt like everything I had worked for was about to crumble. I spent weeks negotiating with new suppliers, trying to find a solution to the delays. It was exhausting, but in the end, it paid off. I found a new manufacturer who could meet the demand, and I started building stronger relationships with my suppliers. Over time, I learned that every challenge was an opportunity to learn and grow, and I became much better at problem solving. Fast forward a few years, and Techniest had grown into a 6-figure business. I had hired a small team to help with operations, customer service, and marketing. I started focusing on expanding our product line, offering even more tech accessories, and even designing custom products for big clients. But the road wasn't always smooth. There were moments when I thought I was going to lose everything: cash flow issues, supplier problems, and stiff competition from other brands. But through it all, I kept pushing. I realized that entrepreneurship wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about learning how to bounce back from it. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes anymore, because I knew they were part of the process. And the more I learned, the more I realized how much I love building a business. Today, Techniest is still running strong, and we've expanded into new markets. But the real reward isn't the money or the success. It's the freedom. I now have the freedom to create the life I want, to take risks, and to keep pursuing new ventures. And every time I look back at where I started, from the corporate job to the sleepless nights building my first website, I'm reminded of how far I've come. If you're thinking of starting a business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. Start now, even if you're not ready. You'll never be fully ready, and there will always be obstacles. But if you're passionate about your idea, and you're willing to learn and adapt, you can make it happen. Just keep pushing, because the only way you fail is if you quit. I started my entrepreneurial journey almost by accident. It was around 2015, and I was fresh out of college with a degree in computer science. Like most recent grads, I had big dreams but zero idea about what direction to take. I knew I wanted to make an impact, and deep down, I thought I'd end up at a tech company doing the whole 9-to-5 grind. But life had different plans. It all began when I was working as a junior developer at a small startup. The pay was decent for a fresh graduate, but something about the environment just didn't sit right with me. The company had big dreams, but the execution was, frankly, chaotic. We were pushing out software updates left and right without a clear vision. I spent more time fixing bugs than building new features. Over time, the frustration began to weigh on me, and I started daydreaming about doing things my way. One evening, as I was working late, I received a message from my old college buddy, Matt. He was into data analytics and had recently started freelancing. He was asking me if I had any interest in working on a side project with him. Matt's message was simple: you know how companies struggle with managing customer feedback? What if we could create a platform that simplifies that? I thought it was an interesting idea. At the time, companies were using tools like SurveyMonkey, but those platforms weren't built to handle the complexity of feedback in real time. There were also issues with categorizing feedback and getting actionable insights from the data. Matt's idea was to build something that used natural language processing (NLP) to analyze feedback, categorize it, and deliver key insights to businesses in real time. The goal was to create an easy-to-use tool that would help businesses understand their customers better without sifting through endless reports. We didn't have a ton of money to start with, so we decided to work on it during our nights and weekends. We would Skype for hours after our day jobs, brainstorming, designing, and coding. It was exciting, but also exhausting. I was working full-time at my day job while learning the ins and outs of starting a business on the side. Matt was handling the analytics and figuring out the algorithms, while I focused on the technical side of the platform. After about 6 months, we finally had a working prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to show potential customers. We reached out to a few small businesses and offered them free access to the platform in exchange for feedback. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Businesses loved the idea of being able to quickly analyze customer feedback and make adjustments in real time. The problem was that we weren't charging for the platform yet, so we had no idea how we were going to make money. Matt and I sat down and had a serious conversation. We realized that we needed to transition from being a side project to a legitimate business if we wanted to make this work. But we were stuck on how to scale it. Both of us had student loans to pay off, and neither of us had the luxury of quitting our day jobs. We needed capital, and we didn't want to rely on friends and family to fund our venture. So we decided to apply for accelerator programs, which were all the rage in the startup world at the time. To our surprise, we got accepted into one of the top accelerators in the country. They provided us with seed funding and mentorship, but the biggest benefit was the network of entrepreneurs and investors that came with the program. We spent the next few months refining our platform, building out new features, and learning everything we could about the startup world. However, not everything went smoothly. One of the biggest challenges we faced was customer acquisition. We had a great product, but we didn't know how to market it. We tried everything: email campaigns, cold calling, social media ads, but nothing seemed to work. It was frustrating. We had a solid product, a strong team, and investors backing us, but we still couldn't get traction. One night, as I was sitting at my desk, feeling defeated, I received a random email from a potential customer. It was from a mid-sized retail company asking if they could do a demo of our platform. The email was polite and well-written, and for some reason, it hit me that this was our opportunity. We had been so focused on reaching out to the big players that we hadn't thought about the small to mid-sized businesses that could benefit from our product. We scheduled a demo with the company, and it went off without a hitch. They loved the platform, and within a week, we had our first paid customer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We then started reaching out to more mid-sized companies in industries like retail, hospitality, and healthcare. Slowly but surely, we began to build up a client base. A few months later, we got a huge break. One of our customers referred us to a major tech company that was looking for a feedback management tool. We couldn't believe it when they asked for a demo. This was a company with thousands of employees, and getting them as a client would be a game changer. We prepped for the demo like it was the Super Bowl. We were nervous but excited, knowing this could be the opportunity that propelled us to the next level. The demo went well, and they signed on as a customer. That was the turning point. Suddenly, our small startup had credibility, and other big companies began taking us seriously. The next few years were a whirlwind. We expanded our product offerings, hired a small team of engineers and customer success reps, and began raising additional rounds of funding. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, late nights, and countless failures along the way. But each time we stumbled, we picked ourselves back up, learned from our mistakes, and moved forward. Now, looking back, I can hardly believe how far we've come. Our platform is used by hundreds of companies across various industries, and we've built a solid reputation in the customer feedback space. I still remember the days when Matt and I would spend hours coding away in our apartments, not knowing if our idea would even work. The key lesson I've learned is that success doesn't come overnight. It takes a lot of persistence, learning from mistakes, and, most importantly, believing in your idea when no one else does. If we had given up during the tough times, we wouldn't be where we are today. And to anyone who's thinking about starting their own business, start. You don't need everything to be perfect from the get-go. Just take the first step and keep moving forward. The rest will follow. A little over 5 years ago, I was sitting in a cramped apartment in a city I'd only just moved to, wondering if I had made the worst decision of my life. I had quit a steady job, left my hometown, and poured every penny I had into a business that, at that point, seemed destined to fail. But here I am today, running a successful company with a growing team and enough financial stability to breathe easy for the first time in years. I'll be honest, there were moments I thought about throwing in the towel, about giving up and heading back home. But looking back now, I know that the hard days were some of the most valuable lessons I've learned on this entrepreneurial journey. I've always been someone who knew I wanted to own a business, but I didn't know what kind of business. My college years were spent with that vague, nagging feeling of knowing I had the drive but not the direction. After graduating with a degree in marketing, I hopped from job to job, each one a little better than the last, but still far from fulfilling. At one point, I was managing a small team at a digital marketing agency, but I just felt like a cog in a machine that was turning without me. The work was fine, the people were nice, but I had this unshakable feeling that I was meant for something more. So, after months of research, I decided to step out and start something of my own. The idea for my business came out of nowhere. At least it felt that way. I had been reading about sustainable fashion, and I stumbled upon a story about how much textile waste is produced every year. It hit me. What if I could build a business that repurposed old and used clothing and turned it into something new and useful? The idea wasn't groundbreaking, but it felt right. I envisioned a small online shop that could take people's old clothes and, through a series of innovative designs and techniques, transform them into upcycled, one-of-a-kind pieces. Something about it clicked. It didn't take long to get to work. I found a small apartment in a new city and dedicated every ounce of energy to making this work. I put together a website, built a social media presence, and started collecting donations of old clothes from friends and family. My savings from my job were almost completely gone, but I was determined to make this work. The first few months were rough, as I was juggling everything myself. I designed the products, managed the website, handled customer service, and tried to stay active on social media. I was barely making enough money to cover my expenses, but I pushed through, telling myself it would eventually pay off. I remember the first time I sold a piece of clothing. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple shirt I had repurposed into a new style. The sale came through on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat there staring at the notification for a good 5 minutes, almost unable to believe that someone had bought something I had made. That moment was a turning point. It gave me a sense of validation, like all my hard work was starting to show results. But I knew I couldn't stop there. I had to scale, and fast. The problem was that I didn't have the money to scale, and I certainly didn't have the expertise. I'd taken a few business courses in college, but I was far from an expert. I didn't even know the first thing about sourcing materials at a larger scale or building a production system. But I learned quickly. I started reaching out to suppliers, connecting with other entrepreneurs, and scouring the internet for any scrap of advice I could find. Slowly, things started to fall into place. I was able to find a small production facility to help with the more labor-intensive parts of the process, and I began collaborating with other local artists to expand my product line. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when I realized I couldn't do everything myself. I had reached a point where I was burning out, doing the same tasks every day and seeing very little growth. So, I took a leap and hired my first employee. It was a scary decision. I had no idea if I could afford to pay anyone, let alone if I could find the right person to help. But it turned out to be one of the best decisions I made. The person I hired was able to take on the social media management, leaving me more time to focus on product development and business strategy. As a result, our online presence began to grow faster than ever. The first few months after that hire were like a snowball effect. As sales increased, I reinvested every penny back into the business. We got more recognition, and with that came more exposure and more orders. But not everything was smooth sailing. One of the hardest things about entrepreneurship is how much you have to sacrifice. There were days when I had to work 16-hour shifts, staying up late to finish orders, respond to customers, and plan for the future. I often missed family events, holidays, and the social life I had before starting my business. I remember being invited to a friend's wedding and deciding not to go because I couldn't afford to take a weekend off. Moments like that made me question if I was doing the right thing. But when I looked at the bigger picture, I knew that the sacrifice was temporary. I kept telling myself that it was all for the future. The next big challenge came when we started getting too big for our boots, figuratively and literally. Our product lines were becoming so popular that we began to run into fulfillment issues. At one point, we were receiving hundreds of orders per week, but our small team and limited resources couldn't keep up. We'd have delays, missed shipments, and frustrated customers. It felt like we were on the verge of losing everything we'd built. I remember spending sleepless nights brainstorming ways to fix the issue. That's when I decided to invest in more advanced inventory management software and streamline our logistics process. It was another gamble, but it paid off. We were able to catch up and grow even more. Fast forward to today, and the business is thriving. We've expanded our product line, built a solid customer base, and hired a team of amazing people. I'm no longer working 16-hour days, and I've learned how to delegate responsibilities to the right people. The money isn't an issue anymore, and I'm finally able to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But more importantly, I've learned the value of resilience. There were countless moments where I wanted to quit, where everything seemed impossible, but I kept going. And today, I'm proud of what I've built. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that nothing is easy, but if you're willing to push through the hard times, the rewards are so much sweeter. If you're on the fence about starting your own business, just know this: the first step is the hardest. But once you take it, you'll be amazed at how much you can grow. Keep going, and the universe will find a way to meet you halfway. A few years ago, I was just another guy working a regular 9-to-5 job. I had always been somewhat entrepreneurial, dabbling in side projects here and there, but nothing ever stuck. I was working as a software developer at a mid-sized tech company, making a decent living, but I always felt like there was something more I should be doing. Something bigger. The idea for my business came to me in an oddly mundane way. One day, I was standing in line at a local coffee shop, scrolling through my phone, and I noticed how inefficient the whole process of ordering and paying for coffee was. The line was long, the baristas were stressed, and it was clear that there were opportunities to streamline things. It hit me. There had to be a better way to make this process more efficient. What if I could build an app that allowed people to order and pay for their coffee ahead of time? This way, they could simply walk in, grab their drink, and leave. No lines, no waiting. At first, I brushed the idea off. It sounded too simple, too obvious. But then, I thought about it more. Coffee shops were everywhere, and the idea of creating an app for a product as universally consumed as coffee made sense. After all, coffee culture was growing, and people were always looking for ways to save time. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it could work. But I had no idea where to begin. I had the technical skills to build the app, but I had no experience in starting a business. I didn't know anything about funding, marketing, or even how to approach coffee shops to partner with. I was just a guy with a laptop and an idea. It felt like an impossible mountain to climb. I didn't let that stop me, though. I started doing some research. I read articles, listened to podcasts, and started following successful entrepreneurs on social media. I learned that the key to starting a business wasn't necessarily having a groundbreaking idea, it was execution. So, I decided to go for it. I spent the next few months developing the first version of the app. It was basic, just a simple interface where users could browse nearby coffee shops, order their drinks, and pay. The functionality was limited, but I didn't care. My goal was to create a working prototype that I could show to potential partners. But here's the thing about entrepreneurship, nothing ever goes as planned. I ran into so many problems along the way that at times, I considered throwing in the towel. The biggest challenge was figuring out how to get coffee shops on board. I cold emailed dozens of them, explaining my idea and how it could help them attract more customers. The responses I got were mostly negative or dismissive. Most coffee shop owners were hesitant to work with someone who wasn't established. Others simply didn't see the value in what I was offering. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. Then, something changed. I realized that if I couldn't get the attention of the big coffee chains, maybe I could start with smaller, local coffee shops. These businesses were more likely to be open to new ideas since they didn't have the resources or established customer bases of larger chains. I shifted my focus and started reaching out to smaller, independent shops. The response was much more positive. I managed to secure my first partnership with a small but popular local cafe. They loved the idea of offering their customers a faster, more convenient way to order, and they agreed to give my app a try. That partnership was a huge turning point for me. I knew that if I could make it work with one shop, I could make it work with others. From there, things started to snowball. I refined the app based on feedback from the coffee shop and its customers. I added features like the ability to save favorite orders, customize drinks, and track loyalty points. The app slowly started to gain traction. More coffee shops began signing on, and more customers started using it. I couldn't believe it. I was actually building something real. But it wasn't all smooth sailing from there. As the app gained users, I faced new challenges. Managing customer support was a nightmare at times. I had to handle complaints, fix bugs, and deal with angry customers who had issues with their orders. There were also technical hurdles to overcome. Scaling the app was difficult. As more people used it, I had to upgrade the infrastructure to handle the increased load. I had to learn quickly, making mistakes along the way, but I kept pushing through. Over time, the app grew, and so did my business. I started hiring a small team to help with development, marketing, and customer support. The company's revenue was growing steadily, but it wasn't until I secured a significant partnership with a well-known regional coffee chain that things really took off. This partnership brought in thousands of new users almost overnight. With that success, I was able to raise my first round of funding. Investors were finally willing to take a chance on me. I had a proven product, a growing user base, and the momentum to take the company to the next level. The money I raised allowed me to expand the team and invest in marketing, and we started seeing exponential growth. As I reflect on the journey, it's hard to believe how far I've come. I went from being a software developer with a simple idea to running a successful business with a team of over 50 people. I've worked with coffee shops across the country and have helped them grow their businesses by offering a more convenient way for customers to order. I've had my fair share of failures, but I've learned more from those moments than I ever could from success. The most important lesson I've learned is that perseverance is key. Starting a business isn't easy, and there will always be obstacles along the way. But if you believe in your idea and are willing to put in the work, success is possible. You'll face rejection, failure, and setbacks, but those are just part of the journey. Keep pushing, keep learning, and keep improving. If you had told me a few years ago that I'd be where I am today, I never would have believed it. But now, I know that anything is possible if you have the drive and the determination to make it happen. The road to entrepreneurship is long and tough, but it's worth every step. If you're thinking about starting your own business, go for it. You never know where it might take you. I grew up in a small town where the idea of success was defined by who could work the hardest in the factory or who had the most reliable truck. It wasn't a town where dreams were nurtured or where anyone expected to do anything other than follow the same path. But from a young age, I knew I was different. I didn't just want a steady job. I wanted to build something that would outlast me, something I could be proud of, something that could change not just my life but the lives of others. The story starts in my late teens when I worked as a cashier in a small, locally owned grocery store. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but I met a lot of interesting people there. One of them, an older man named Bob, would come in every Friday for his weekly shopping. He wasn't a typical customer. Instead of rushing in and out, he'd chat with everyone, including me. Over time, we became friends, and one day, as I was bagging his groceries, he told me something that would change the trajectory of my life forever. "You know," Bob said, "you've got a real knack for talking to people. Have you ever thought about sales?" At the time, I didn't even know what that meant. I was just a kid trying to get by, but Bob's comment planted a seed. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Sales? What did that mean? What kind of sales? But I started doing some research, reading books about entrepreneurship and the art of selling. I was fascinated. The idea that someone could sell a product or a service, convince people they needed it, and make money in the process, now that was something I could get behind. By the time I was 19, I had saved enough money from my job at the grocery store to buy a beat-up old car and an online course about sales and marketing. I didn't have any connections, no experience, and certainly no fancy degree, but I was determined. I started selling whatever I could find, mostly small items from thrift stores and garage sales. My approach was simple: buy low, sell high, and make sure the customer felt like they were getting a good deal. I would take photos of items, create ads on social media, and hustle every day. It wasn't glamorous, but I was learning how to sell. Slowly, the money started to trickle in. Then came the first major turning point. I sold a vintage camera I had found at a garage sale for $300. I had bought it for $30. That one sale changed everything. The rush of making that kind of money from something I'd found in a dusty old box was indescribable. I realized I was onto something, and that was when I made my first real investment: a used laptop and a website to sell my finds. I was officially in business. The early days were rough. I barely knew how to run a website, let alone market it. I spent long nights learning about SEO, paid ads, email marketing, anything I could to get my website off the ground. I didn't sleep much, but I was obsessed. My business grew slowly, but steadily. I started sourcing higher quality items, eventually transitioning from garage sale finds to wholesale deals. But the real breakthrough came when I identified a gap in the market. I had been dabbling in electronics, but I noticed that people were constantly looking for specific types of vintage tech, old computers, phones, and even game consoles. There was an audience for it. The catch? No one had a reliable source for these items. I could change that. I made the decision to pivot my business entirely towards sourcing and selling vintage electronics, focusing on rare and hard-to-find items. I spent hours hunting through online auction sites, estate sales, and electronics shops to build a supply. But I also knew I had to stand out. I wasn't just going to sell old tech. I was going to sell it with a story. Each item had to come with a detailed history, photos, and reviews of how it worked. That shift took my business from being a small, somewhat profitable venture to something that could scale. People loved the authenticity of it. They appreciated the stories I told about each item, the careful restoration, and the transparency about the condition. It wasn't just about selling things, it was about creating an experience for the buyer. Over the next few years, my business grew exponentially. I went from being a one-man show to hiring a small team to help with sourcing, refurbishing, and shipping. I invested in better software, better marketing, and even a physical storefront where people could come and browse. But my main focus was always on providing value to the customer. The hard work paid off, but it wasn't without its challenges. The first major hurdle came when a competitor with a bigger budget entered the market. They undercut prices, ran massive ad campaigns, and seemed to have all the resources I lacked. It felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I started losing customers to this new player, and for a while, I wondered if it was the end of my dream. But I didn't give up. Instead of trying to compete on price, I doubled down on my niche. I offered personalized customer service, started a loyalty program, and began creating educational content around the vintage tech I was selling. I knew my customers valued quality, so I focused on what made my business unique: personalization, expertise, and authenticity. It took time, but eventually my loyal customer base returned. They weren't just looking for cheap deals, they wanted an experience, and that's what I offered. Years went by, and my business continued to grow. I expanded into new product lines, built partnerships with other businesses, and even started a blog that shared tips on collecting and restoring vintage tech. My website became a go-to destination for enthusiasts, and my brand became synonymous with quality. In 2022, my company was generating over $5 million in annual revenue. From selling $30 cameras to creating a thriving business, it had been a wild ride, but I had learned that perseverance, adapting to change, and focusing on what makes you different can lead to success. But the journey didn't end there. Even now, I'm constantly looking for ways to innovate and expand. I've moved into other niche markets, have a larger team than ever, and am working on international expansion. Every day brings new challenges, but it's exciting. The lessons I've learned are invaluable, and I'm proud of what I've built. I still keep in touch with Bob, the man who planted the seed. When I told him that my business was now making millions, he just laughed and said, "I knew you had it in you." Sometimes I think back to those days when I was just a kid bagging groceries and wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't taken the risk, if I hadn't listened to that one conversation with Bob. What I've learned is simple. You don't need a big budget, fancy degrees, or a network of powerful people to succeed. What you need is a willingness to learn, a lot of grit, and the courage to take that first step. So, to anyone reading this, especially if you feel stuck in your current situation, take a chance. Start small, learn along the way, and keep pushing. The road may be bumpy, but the rewards are worth it. Just never forget, the journey is just as important as the destination. It all started back in 2017, when I was 28 years old and living in a small, cramped apartment in downtown Chicago. I was working a 9-to-5 job as a marketing assistant for a mid-sized company. The pay was decent, but the work was soul-sucking. My boss was a micromanager, and my colleagues were all either in their mid-40s and stuck in their ways or fresh out of college, just looking for a paycheck. I had this lingering feeling of being stuck, like I was just drifting through life without a clear direction. On weekends, I try to distract myself from the monotony by binge-watching shows, reading books on entrepreneurship, and listening to podcasts. Every episode seemed to hammer home the idea that anyone can do it. They all shared success stories of entrepreneurs who started with nothing and built massive companies. I couldn't help but feel like they were talking directly to me. At the time, I had zero experience in business, and I had no idea where to even begin, but I wanted out of the corporate grind. One afternoon, I was sitting in a coffee shop with a cup of overpriced iced latte, scrolling through social media. I came across an ad for a course on digital marketing. It was a 6-week program that promised to teach you how to build and scale an online business from the ground up. The cost was steep, $500, which felt like a huge gamble at the time, but I decided to take the plunge. I didn't have a lot of savings, and I knew I had to either sink or swim if I wanted to break free from my job. The first couple of weeks of the course were overwhelming. There were so many new concepts: SEO, paid ads, copywriting, email marketing, the list went on. But I stuck with it. I spent every free moment I had outside of my day job studying the course material, applying it to small side projects, and experimenting with different marketing strategies. Slowly but surely, I started seeing results. My first breakthrough came when I helped a local coffee shop with their online presence. Using the strategies from the course, I managed to double their Instagram followers in a month and bring in more foot traffic. The owner was ecstatic, and he paid me a modest fee for my services. That small victory gave me the confidence I needed to take my side hustle more seriously. I started offering digital marketing services to other small businesses. It wasn't easy. There were long days and nights spent learning and perfecting my craft, but I was driven. I knew I couldn't keep working a job that drained me while building my future on the side. Eventually, I reached a tipping point. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week, juggling my day job and freelance work, and I felt like I was running on fumes. One night, after a particularly exhausting day at the office, I made the decision to quit my job. It wasn't a logical choice. I didn't have a steady stream of clients yet, and I certainly didn't have the safety net of a big savings account. But I was fed up. I knew I could make it work if I just gave myself the time and space to focus on my business full-time. I handed in my resignation the next morning and took a leap of faith. The first few months of full-time entrepreneurship were a mix of excitement and terror. Without a steady paycheck coming in, the pressure was on to land clients. I cold called businesses, sent cold emails, and relentlessly pitched my services on social media. There were countless rejections, and I felt like I was banging my head against a wall. But then, a breakthrough came when I landed a contract with a small e-commerce brand. They were struggling to grow their sales, and they needed help with digital marketing. The project was a game changer. I implemented a comprehensive strategy that included Facebook and Instagram ads, email campaigns, and influencer partnerships. Within 3 months, their sales tripled, and they were thrilled with the results. They recommended me to several other businesses, and I started building a solid client base. By the end of that first year, I had replaced my old salary. I was able to breathe easier, but the work was still grueling. There were times when I wondered if I had made the right decision, but every client success story kept me going. In 2019, I took things to the next level. I started hiring a small team of freelancers to help with content creation, social media management, and copywriting. This allowed me to focus more on business development and client strategy. The extra hands helped me scale the business faster, and soon I had a small but thriving agency. That was when the real challenges began. As the business grew, so did the responsibilities. I found myself dealing with cash flow issues, managing client expectations, and navigating the complexities of running a business. It was exhausting, and there were moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. But with each new obstacle, I learned. I hired a mentor to help guide me through the rough patches, and I took a more systematic approach to managing my finances, sales, and operations. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and everything changed. The digital marketing industry saw a massive shift as businesses moved online. I found myself scrambling to keep up with the rapid pace of change. But instead of panicking, I doubled down on helping businesses transition to digital platforms. I helped some of my clients pivot their operations and survive during the lockdowns, and as a result, I built even stronger relationships with them. By the end of 2021, my agency was growing faster than I could keep up with. We had a team of 10 full-time employees, and our revenue was steadily climbing. But even though I was technically successful, I felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. The business had become a machine, and I wasn't enjoying it as much as I thought I would. I was constantly putting out fires and managing client demands, but I wasn't doing the work I loved. That's when I decided to make another major shift. I pivoted my business model to focus more on consulting and coaching. Instead of working with clients on a day-to-day basis, I started offering high-level strategy sessions and teaching other aspiring entrepreneurs how to build their own businesses. This shift not only reignited my passion for entrepreneurship, but also allowed me to create more scalable income streams. I began to feel like I was finally living the life I had dreamed of when I first left my corporate job. Now, as I sit in my home office in 2025, looking back at everything I've accomplished, I'm proud of how far I've come. I've built a successful business from the ground up, faced countless challenges, and learned more than I ever thought possible. It hasn't been easy, and it certainly hasn't been a straight path, but it's been worth it. And the best part? I'm just getting started. Would I recommend entrepreneurship to others? Absolutely. But I'd tell anyone who's thinking about it that it's not for the faint of heart. It requires hard work, resilience, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes. Most importantly, it requires a relentless belief that you can create the life you want, no matter how impossible it seems. In the end, it's not just about the money or the business. It's about the freedom and control you gain over your own future. And that, to me, is priceless. It was a crisp autumn morning when I first realized that the idea I had been toying with for months could be something more than just a passing thought. I remember the exact moment. I was sitting in my cramped, coffee-stained apartment, a pile of half-eaten takeout containers stacked on my desk. I had just finished another soul-sucking day at a dead-end job that barely paid the rent. I had been working in a call center for almost 3 years, answering the same repetitive questions, handling complaints from irate customers, and feeling the soul-crushing weight of my stagnation grow heavier every day. That day was different. I had come across a post online about someone who had turned a small hobby into a full-time business. They started by selling products on eBay, then expanded into their own e-commerce site, eventually making 6 figures. I had seen similar stories before, but something about this one struck me. Maybe it was the way they described their process, how they started with a clear vision, how they focused on a niche market, how they persevered through their failures. I couldn't help but think, why not me? Why can't I do this? I had always been a creative person. I loved designing things, making them feel unique and personal. I spent hours on weekends customizing clothes, creating custom t-shirts, and experimenting with different designs. But like most people, I had no idea how to turn that passion into a business. I knew how to make things, but I had no clue how to sell them. I didn't even know where to start. I thought about it for a while, bouncing ideas off my friends, and trying to figure out if I could actually make a living doing something that I loved. The idea of launching my own business seemed intimidating, but it also felt liberating. I wanted out of the monotonous cycle I was stuck in, and I wanted something that would allow me to be my own boss, set my own schedule, and do something that excited me every day. After a week of obsessing over the idea, I finally decided to take the plunge. I gathered all the savings I had, which wasn't much, researched the basics of starting an online business, and set up a simple website. I remember sitting at my desk that night, staring at the blank screen of my computer, asking myself, what the hell am I doing? I had no business experience, no marketing skills, and no idea how to find customers. But I did have something else, an idea that I believed in. I was determined to make it work. I started with just a handful of designs, all centered around minimalist themes that I thought would appeal to people who appreciated simple, clean aesthetics. My first sale came after a few weeks of advertising on social media, and it was a rush like nothing I had ever experienced. Someone actually liked my design enough to spend their hard-earned money on it. I couldn't believe it. But the road was far from smooth. I spent the next few months working late into the night, teaching myself everything I could about e-commerce, marketing, and customer service. I made countless mistakes. I spent way too much money on Facebook ads that didn't convert. I had issues with suppliers and inventory management. My website crashed twice, leaving customers unable to check out. I dealt with returns and refunds and angry emails from customers who were dissatisfied with their orders. I even had a few moments where I seriously considered throwing in the towel. But there was something in me that refused to quit. Every time I made a mistake or hit a roadblock, I used it as a learning opportunity. I asked for help when I needed it, joined online communities of other entrepreneurs, and started implementing the feedback I received from customers. Slowly but surely, things began to improve. I had a breakthrough one night when I realized that the reason my designs weren't selling as well as I had hoped was because I hadn't properly identified my target audience. I had been focusing on a broad market, thinking that everyone would love my designs, but I hadn't taken the time to understand the specific needs of my ideal customers. Once I figured that out, everything clicked. I adjusted my marketing strategies, tailored my messaging, and began engaging more with potential customers on social media. Slowly, the sales started to come in. At the 6-month mark, I made my first $1,000 in profit. It was a huge milestone for me, but I wasn't done. I had bigger dreams. Over the next year, I expanded my product offerings, added new designs, and started offering a wider range of items. I also invested in improving my website and hired a few freelancers to help with customer service and design work. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of setbacks along the way, but I was growing. I was learning, and I was getting better at what I was doing. Eventually, I was able to quit my call center job and focus on my business full-time. It wasn't a smooth transition. There were moments when I was terrified that I wasn't making enough money to survive. But I had gained enough confidence in my abilities and had built a small but loyal customer base that kept me going. 2 years in, my business hit 6 figures. I remember sitting in my new home office, staring at the numbers on my screen, and thinking about how far I had come. It was surreal. From that cramped apartment where I started with nothing but an idea, to a successful business that allowed me to live life on my own terms. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the freedom I had created for myself. I had designed my own path, and every step had been worth it. Of course, there were days when I felt overwhelmed and days when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But the highs far outweighed the lows, and I had built something that was truly mine. Now, looking back, I'm proud of everything I've accomplished. I'm proud of the late nights, the mistakes, the hard work, and the determination that kept me moving forward. I'm also proud of the person I've become in the process, someone who no longer feels stuck, who has the courage to take risks, and who believes that success is earned through persistence and learning. My business continues to grow, and I'm always thinking about the next steps, the next challenge. But no matter how far I go, I'll always remember that first step I took on that chilly autumn morning, sitting at my desk and deciding that I wasn't going to let fear or doubt stop me from chasing my dreams. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the journey isn't easy, but it's worth it. It takes time, effort, and a lot of grit. But if you keep pushing forward, even when things get tough, you can build something incredible. And that's exactly what I did. This is a story of how I went from being a broke college student to running a multi-million-dollar online business. It wasn't easy, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I hope my story can inspire someone out there who's in the middle of their own hustle and just needs a bit of motivation to keep pushing. It all started when I was in my second year of college. I was studying business, but at that point, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was living in a small apartment with 2 roommates, barely scraping by with my part-time job at a local coffee shop. My parents were supportive, but I could tell they were getting frustrated with how long it was taking me to figure things out. I wasn't the type to have a clear path ahead of me, like some of my classmates, who had already lined up internships or had parents who knew people in the industry. One day, as I was cleaning tables at work, I overheard a conversation between a couple of customers. They were talking about how they'd just hired someone from an online platform to design a logo for their new business. The way they were talking about it made me realize that there was an entire world of services being offered online that I hadn't even considered. I knew that if these people were able to hire someone remotely for something like logo design, there must be an entire market for other freelance services. At that moment, I felt a spark. I had always been good at graphic design and had been teaching myself Photoshop since high school. The thought that I could make money from something I already enjoyed doing made me excited. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had to try. That night, after work, I stayed up late researching online freelancing platforms. The biggest ones at the time were Fiverr and Upwork, and I decided to start with Fiverr. I created a profile and set up a gig offering logo design for a really low price, just $5 to start. I wasn't expecting to make a fortune, but I figured if I could get a few clients, it would give me a sense of what this whole freelancing thing was like. To my surprise, I got my first order within 24 hours. The client was a small business owner who needed a logo for his new pet store. He gave me a brief, and I went to work. It took me about 5 hours to finish the design, but when I sent it to him, he was thrilled. He even left me a positive review. That was a huge confidence boost, and I started to believe that maybe this could be more than just a side gig. Over the next few weeks, I kept working on Fiverr, and while the money wasn't anything to write home about, I started to learn a lot. I learned how to communicate with clients, how to price my services, and how to deal with revisions and feedback. I also realized that the more time and effort I put into my gigs, the more likely I was to get repeat clients and positive reviews. But I wanted to scale this. I didn't just want to make a few $100 a month. I wanted to build something bigger. So, I took a step back and thought about what I could do to stand out. I had noticed that there were a lot of designers offering similar services on Fiverr, but none of them seemed to really put much effort into their branding. That's when it hit me. What if I positioned myself as the designer who went above and beyond in terms of customer service and branding? I invested in creating a high-quality portfolio. I made my Fiverr gig look more professional by writing a catchy and compelling description, and I spent time creating custom graphics to make my profile stand out. I also started offering packages with additional services like business card designs and social media assets. Slowly but surely, I started getting more clients. Then came my first real breakthrough. I had been working with a client who was starting a small business selling handmade candles. She loved my work and mentioned that she was thinking about launching a website to sell her products. I had no web design experience, but I knew that I could learn. I asked if she would be interested in me building her website. She said yes, but she would only pay me if I could create a website that was as professional as the big e-commerce stores she'd seen. I knew it was a huge risk, but I took the job. I spent every waking moment of the next few weeks learning how to build a website, watching tutorials, and experimenting with different platforms like Shopify and WordPress. It was the hardest work I had ever done, and I made tons of mistakes, but in the end, I delivered a website that was better than I had expected. The client was over the moon. She loved it so much that she asked if I could manage her social media too. This was another opportunity one wasn't prepared for, but I said yes anyway. Slowly, I was building a client base, and people were starting to recommend me to others. The more services I offered, the more work I got, and eventually, I was able to quit my coffee shop job. Fast forward a few years, and I had built an online business that offered a full suite of digital services, logo design, website development, social media management, and digital marketing. I had grown from being a solo freelancer on Fiverr to a team of 10 remote workers. We all worked from home, and I was managing everything from the operations to client communications. There were a lot of growing pains along the way. There were days when I was overwhelmed with work and nights where I was up until 3 a.m. meeting deadlines. There were also plenty of mistakes, like when I hired the wrong people or underestimated how much time a project would take. But I learned from every mistake. I learned the importance of delegation, setting clear expectations with clients, and knowing when to say no. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I've come. From that first $5 gig to now running a six-figure business, it's been an incredible journey. The key takeaway from all of this? Don't be afraid to start small. You don't have to have it all figured out at the beginning. But if you're willing to put in the work, learn along the way, and adapt to changes, you can achieve things you never thought possible. I hope this story can be a reminder to anyone out there who feels stuck or uncertain about their path. You don't have to have all the answers right away. You just have to take that first step, and the rest will follow. I'll leave you with this. The best time to start is right now. Whether it's a side hustle, a new business, or something entirely different, don't wait for the perfect moment. Just go for it. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.